In this video, I'll be discussing remote viewing the origin of the Urantia Book, a mysterious text that describes the history and destiny of humanity in the universe, and it's often believed to have been gifted by celestial or angelic beings. But what we discovered is shockingly different. Welcome to This Story from the Matrix. I'm Stuart, founder of Technical Intuition and author of Remote Viewing the Complete Guide. And if you're new here, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe. And I would also really like to thank my patrons for supporting this channel. Special shout out to Shannon. Your generous pledge really means a lot to me, so thank you for that. And if you enjoy this content and you want to see more, consider becoming a patron yourself. Link is down in the description below. First published in Chicago of 1955, the Urantia Book, sometimes called the Urantia Papers, is a 2,000-page document that presents an account of the origin, history, and destiny of humanity. Beginning with descriptions of God and the central universe, it moves outwards towards life on our planet, which it calls Urantia, the universe's name for Earth. It also provides a narrative for what's to come, and even relays a highly detailed biography of Jesus. Now, the Urantia Book is not based on the Bible, but many do believe it's somewhat consistent with its spiritual teachings. Now, with respect to the life of Jesus, the Urantia Book contains much greater detail. Scholars estimate that the New Testament describes only about 29 separate days of Jesus' life, while the Urantia Book fills almost 700 pages of his story, spanning 36 years. It's claimed that the Urantia Book was authored by supermortal celestial beings through an unnamed human subject, and that they conveyed these messages to him while he was in his sleep. Now, this began in 1923, when a prominent Chicago psychiatrist, Dr. William Sadler, privately transcribed the contactee's messages and assembled a small group to study the work while hiding this individual's identity. These supermortals described themselves as extraterrestrials from other planets and star systems, and claimed to be observing and guiding the evolution of our planet since the days of Adam and Eve, who were supposedly transported here from another planet. And they believed that Christendom today ultimately has distorted the true nature and teachings of Jesus, and that this time period is now receptive for their new epochal revelations. The manner in which the book unfolded is that Sadler's study group would submit written questions to the contactee, who would then answer them while channeling these beings in his sleep. If you're familiar with America's Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Cayce, there are some prominent similarities. Like Cayce, the work provides a number of scientific claims and dates, sizes, locations, all related to cosmology. However, in testing the credibility of the information, much of the supposed science fact is, well, it was taken rather uncritically by the human sources at the time. The fact that the redactors of the text didn't have a very good understanding of the material they were editing makes the errors and inconsistencies all the more apparent. Dan Massey, a graduate of MIT and Harvard University, who served for 2 decades on the committee for the Urantia Book Fellowship, discussed this topic in a speech she gave in 2003. She pointed out that some papers provide a very high-level overview of nature, material, and manifestation in the universe, but then descend into a garble of an early 20th century college textbook. Yet then again, towards the end of the paper, they suddenly shift back to dealing with the abstract and the spiritual again. Massey believes that the opening and closing sections of these chapters could hardly have been written by humans. The midsection, however, she concludes are nothing but a garbled set of disconnected excerpts from physics books. The reason? The publishers added it afterwards and passed it off as the original source material to inspire a new reading audience. Essentially, a 1950s version of clickbait. To date, the 2,000-page volume has been translated into over 14 different languages, but it's difficult to gauge how many followers of the book exist today, as there's no central organization for census. No clergy, no institutions, no churches, reading forums, or even temples were ever developed. Now, in 2016, the team I was working with at the time was tasked with remote viewing this topic to see whether or not we could suss out the true origins of the Urantia Book and who they belong to, whether it be men and women involved with publishing the material, or as the work claims, supernatural celestial beings transmitting concepts across time and space to a contactee. Origin being a key word here, because the project manager wanted to follow the information back up the line to the first domino, so to speak. Myself and the other remote viewers were tasked blind, and all project work I'm about to share was produced without any foreknowledge of the topic. Now, if you're new to remote viewing, there's 3 key concepts you need to know before looking at the session scans. Number 1, remote viewing is a method of technical intuition developed by the Stanford Research Institute, and it allows access to non-local information about any person, place, thing, or event through expanded perception. Number 2, remote viewers are specifically tasked blind. This means no foreknowledge of the topic is known by the viewer ahead of time, and all results, including the ones in this video, follow that protocol. And number 3, upon project completion, the viewer analyzes their sketches and descriptive data to assemble a final picture, comparing the results against what's known and what's not. Now, if you've ever thought about learning remote viewing yourself, I just released an online video class teaching the fundamentals, which includes regular live Q&As, access to a growing private community of beginners that have already signed up from across the world. So if this interests you, there's a link to a free preview in the description below. Remote viewing session data is comprised of both basic sketches and spontaneous stream of consciousness descriptive information about these diagrams. To begin with, let's take a look at the first compilation of the data on page 16 of the session. We call this the site template. Now, you can pause the video and look at each page individually if you'd like, but the site template combines all of these together. And the answer to the question is always found on this page, which in our case is the origin of the Urantia Book, where the information came from. Starting with the top left diagram, this is a special building with linked corridors that acts as a research facility. There are those here that are imposing a form of judgment and discernment, which is then being transmitted telepathically. This place acts as a center, a central hub, if you will, that's imposing a sense of dominance on others. This broadcast is occurring through a form of magnetic reversal, which results in communication with another person or party. The ideas transmitted are predictive in nature, and they forecast the arrival of something. And there's also a unique calling card associated with the transmission, put it in quotes there, "We are here." Now, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's another diagram, which isn't fully fleshed out at this point, but it's cleared up on future explorations on the next pages. However, something organic and sore or infected is here, which is like a pustule, and it exists in a tangled and messy state. It's either a life form or a group of life forms that have severely messed up somehow, which is then being broadcast, or at least the broadcast is related to it. Now, from the site template alone, we can glean a few things based off the feedback available. First of all, the original story of the Urantia Book states that the information was obtained telepathically by a sleeping contactee. Now, this is rather clearly confirmed by the remote viewing data. However, it provides context. It provides a bit about the who, the why, and also the what for. Second, it shows that the information was sent out by a group intending to impose their dominance on the receiving party. And since the book itself states it's a message for humanity, it's done as an act of judgment. The tangled mess could certainly apply to what humans have done with the place. And the book is intended as a epochal revelation. The follow-on work, in which I'll get to in just a moment, illustrates just exactly what mess they're referring to. Finally, there's a prediction and forecast of the arrival of something that's noted in this transmission. As a comparison to the feedback material, the Urantia Book carries a large amount of prophecy about the future of humanity, particularly that we're on a disintegrating course. For example, on pages 2081 and 2082 of the Urantia Book, it reads, "Urantia is now quivering on the very brink. The godless philosophy of human society will lead only to unrest, animosity, unhappiness, and worldwide disaster. Still more terrible destruction is yet to come." This is an important point to remember because it echoes other accounts about this agency, which we'll discover towards the end of the video. The next step in the remote viewing project was to break out a few of these concepts into individual explorations, allowing for a fuller and clearer picture to emerge. The basic answer of the original question was achieved, but the project manager wanted additional details to see what could be discovered. 6 explorations were undertaken while blind, starting off with the descriptor pustule. At the time, it was still a bit unclear what this exactly was. Once connected to the idea pattern, I drew what looks like 2 smokestacks and some form of material being released through the top. The high-level descriptive data received denotes a blight that's been scattered and is marring the source of oxygen in an environment. A descriptive word arose in the work that I wasn't actually familiar with at the time, which was turpid. This arises from the Latin turpus, meaning foul, base, wicked, and morally depraved. This is a description of life forms carrying out a damaging activity that's affecting the environment. Pollution, destroying the climate, the atmosphere, our planetary habitat, negatively affecting our ability to survive off the land. And then down at the bottom, you'll see meeting our dietary needs. Now, looking back through the lens of the exploration, we can see that this organic pustule that's being referred to on the site template is pointing to societies of the world destroying the Earth, treating it kind of like a garbage dump with base and morally depraved behavior. Next, in Explorations 2 and 3, I viewed the facility and the corridors to get a better understanding of the type of environment the telepathic message originated from. The diagram of the facility shows it's embedded down into and underneath the surface, almost like a nail driven into a board of wood, with various extensions and corridors branching off from this main structure. The high-level descriptive data shows that the building is locked into place and is stationary in a fresh, watery environment, potentially the ocean floor. Now, during the viewing, it appeared rather opulent, which is to say that something about it is luxurious or lavish. And if you were to stand from a distance and view it, the building would look magnificent or grandiose. I also picked up more activity that was taking place at the facility, which was focused on a singular goal, concentrating on conflict resolution and the inner turmoil that it brings. It has a UN kind of feeling, where various groups have come together in an attempt to solve the world's problems. Next, looking specifically at the corridors that branch out from this facility, the diagram shows a rather complex network that spans across various horizontal levels and angled corridors connecting them, almost like what you'd expect to find from an underground ant's nest. The high-level information about this aspect of the facility was also rather interesting, because while it again supported the idea of a subterranean structural component, it went a bit further and noted that it was made of clay under a plateau or bluff. Strangely, this secretive network of corridors is lined with a chemical ooze, and the texture appears rather messy and slimy, something that's fluctuating in a torpid state, which simply means dormant. And whatever it is that exists in these corridors is slow, lifeless, and inert. Something's being hidden within the walls in these corridors, and those in charge of the facility don't want others to find out about it. However, what this precisely is, or to what end, I was never tasked with looking at it further, primarily because it would have opened up a completely new line of inquiry. Moving on to Exploration 4, this zooms in on the communication that's occurring, specifically who's sending out the transmission and communicating telepathically. Now, the diagrammatic drawing of this individual is interesting because it shows they have a halo, their arms are spread open, and some form of energetics are emanating from the top of their head. The diagram is very similar to depictions of Christ that you find in artwork. In fact, it's reminiscent of the colossal statue of Christ at the summit of Mount Corcovado in Rio de Janeiro. I think it's rather likely that how this information was originally communicated took a visage of a religious form in the mind of the receiver. The high-level data obtained describes an illuminated person qualified as a representative for a larger group. Now, my imagination tried to pattern match this idea, and what it came up with is the concept of an angel. But it's clearly presenting a message of condemnation in an attempt to influence and overthrow something. Now, this being is merely a tiny piece of a greater whole, kind of like a fractured or compartmentalized intelligence that's attempting to influence others for what it feels is the greater good. Now, this data point arrived in a somewhat sarcastic tone, which is why I labeled it with single quotes. And the agenda it's propagating, it views as benevolent. But whether or not this is actually the case is likely a matter of perspective. Next, Exploration 5 views the concept of the arrival of an object moving rather quickly, with a tail or a stream of material coming off the back end. The diagram itself looks markedly similar to the structure described as the origin of the telepathic communication, but whether or not it's one and the same is unknown. The descriptive data reveals a vast gray empire of organics that are moving on a forward trajectory. They are set for the arrival and descending upon a planet with the intent of conquering its woes and friction, to put an immediate stop to the momentum of that community. Now, this is perhaps where the information begins to illuminate the intentions behind those that first communicated the Urantia Book ideas. The remote viewing data suggests that an outside force, not local to this system, is presently on a trajectory to descend upon the planet and take it by force. Now, this is not because they're after minerals or some other human-contrived idea, but because they desire order. They wish to crush the woes of the planet with swift action, putting a stop to what they deem untenable. In this final 6th exploration, the project manager had me take a look at the word "we" in the original statement, "We are here." Who is this specifically? Well, this exploration took us all by surprise, as it was a completely unexpected result. The initial diagram shows 4 lifeform archetypes surrounding and circling what most likely represents Earth, with outstretched arms. The high-level data describes the group as observing, watchful guardians, that they hold a knowing and an understanding of their charge, which is this plane. And in the past, they have been peaceful, circling the planet as its overseers. However, there's malcontent among this brigade of protectors, which are classified as a form of cavalry. Now, a more detailed sketch was requested by the project manager at this point, along with specific tasking for me to investigate the relationship between the group polluting the environment, us, humanity, and this group of guardians. And as you can see, the visual rendition of this particular life form may not be unfamiliar to those who have done research in the fields of abduction or ufology. This life form is markedly similar to a praying mantis, with dark, opaque oval eyes and a long, slim face. The body is slightly hunched, as 2 arms protrude from the front, as opposed to the side, such as having shoulders. And the relationship diagram produced the following data. First, between the 2 groups, humanity and these mantis-looking creatures, there's a feeling of almost comical anger and hate, like an adolescent might have towards a long-lost father figure that acted in a coercive manner. And this may have led to the child rebelling with debauchery. Now, in investigating the relationship of humanity towards this group, it has an underlying sense of contempt, but also a lack of comprehension as to the agendas or motives of these particular creatures. The feeling that what's been done to them by these life forms is unfair, and it leaves an underlying sense of distrust of them, while demanding to be left alone. Finally, the manner in which these Mantid beings view humanity is through a lens of putrid contempt with pulsing power. They are the authority figure. They have the power, and they flex their will upon humanity in a way that they deem the greater good. And this has resulted in condemnation and ultimately catastrophic judgment. That if humanity were ultimately to be eliminated, possibly a correction would occur and the sorrows of this planet would be gone. Now, these data points shed a completely new light on the origin of the Urantia Book, especially considering the beings responsible for the transmission are often described in abduction scenarios. The remote viewing project found that these 2 groups may very well be one and the same. However, it also ultimately reveals what's going on behind the scenes and the agenda of this mantis-looking collective. These beings presented themselves to a contactee who recorded the Urantia papers, and they did so with a visage out of Western religious imagery, arms out, halos adorned, and a message of humanity's past, present, and future. And they did this from a place of authority and in an attempt to spread a new epochal message, perhaps even to start a new religion. But the motivation behind the endeavor was masked, and even the identity of the creatures involved hidden. So what's known about this particular group from other first-hand accounts? Well, they're referred to as Mantis aliens, and they appear within many abduction scenarios. 6 to 7 feet tall, long thin torsos, and necks and arms that have additional joints. Their heads look almost insect-like, and they're also triangular and large in shape, with slanted eyes and deep black-brown sockets. Their skin is often described as coated in an oily substance, and in abduction scenarios, these mantis beings tend to act as overseers and appear in a leadership role or position of power. Generally, a mantis is accompanied by several smaller life forms that do its bidding, and they're assumed to be controlled and hive-minded. Interestingly though, a common thread found among many of the abduction scenarios is centered around the use of holographic projections as a means of education. Abductees often report mantis beings showing them holographic images of the destruction of the planet Earth to illustrate the possible negative impact of our species could have on this planet. Sounds familiar to the remote viewing data, doesn't it? And while many describe their experience with these creatures as positive and uplifting, a group that seeks to protect humanity and the Earth, others paint a somewhat darker picture, which includes that this Mantis group's true intentions is to conquer Earth and control the planet rather than aid in our spiritual evolution. Now, there are also reports that a Mantis hybridization program currently exists, which is being used to ultimately replace humanity with a newer, better form of man, one that this group could much more easily control and manipulate, bringing everlasting peace to the planet. Now, I find this last data point particularly interesting because it's exactly what actually showed up in the relationship diagram between the group responsible for transmitting the Urantia Book and humanity. That if man in its current state were eliminated, then the sorrows of this planet would be gone. What better way to do this than to create a new hybrid form of man to replace us after they've arrived and conquered the planet? Ultimately, what this remote viewing project did was expose the agenda of this group and their intentions here on Earth. It shows that these Mantis aliens masquerade as celestial and spiritual beings, when in reality, there's something far more menacing that we should become aware of, lest they carry out an agenda with which we have no say in. Now, there's more I could say about this group, based primarily on first-hand experiences, but I feel that's a presentation for another time, or another video. But if you've had any experience with these Mantis beings, or any thoughts on their agenda, I would love to hear about them in the comments below. I have a lot more to share in upcoming videos, so I hope you'll join our growing community here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel and also hitting the like on the video. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook at bstuartrv for frequent behind-the-scenes updates. And so with that, thanks for joining me in this story from the Matrix. Keep your eyes open, stand in your discernment, and seek the truth. I'll see you in the next video.